Let's grab our Bibles and turn to Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12, we'll be picking up in verse 49. We'll read 49 through 53. This is Jesus talking here. He says, I came to cast fire on the earth, and would that it were already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. Do you think that I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, in one house there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. I thought the song said that, Jesus came to give peace and goodwill toward all men, right? That's not quite what Jesus is saying here, though, is he? What's he referencing? What's he talking about? What's this casting fire on the earth? You think he's talking about whenever he comes, the end of the world? Is that what we're talking about? The end of time, potentially? Okay, yeah. I do agree that fire definitely points in that direction.
And he has to bring judgment.
Mm-hmm.
There was, you had the Jews and you had everyone else.
Yeah.
Just were under the law. There was judgment under the law.
Right.
Everyone else would receive judgment, but it was a little
Right.
different.
Right.
But even among the Jews, like, if you're a Pharisee, were you a good Pharisee? Were you not a good Pharisee? What did you keep the law?
Right.
And then suddenly, now, when he's with the law fulfilled, it comes down to, do you believe in him or not?
Right. Right. Yeah. Many times it talks about, like, you go to the beginning of Luke where John is talking. He talks about his winnowing fork is in his hand. He's going to separate the wheat from the chaff, and the chaff will be burned up with fire. Right. And so there is a judgment and condemnation in what's about to happen. Right. And one of the commentators that I listen to, he equates the fire that he's talking about here with the gospel. The way he looks at it is that he's talking about setting the world, spreading the word. And that's the way that he looked at it. I don't know. I mean, he's...
And that when you hear it, like,
Mm-hmm.
you accept it, but everybody else in your family doesn't, and
Yeah.
you're separated.
Yeah, and I get, if you just pulled, I came to cast fire on the earth, and where it was already kindled, and that was it, and it wasn't mixed with any of the other concept of what he's talking about, I would be on board with the judgment, condemnation, and potentially end of time. But then when you put it in with the other stuff, we're talking about his baptism that he is to be baptized with. Let's talk about that first. What is the baptism that he is waiting to be baptized with? Right. Yeah, his baptism of suffering, basically, right, where he will go and bear the sins of the world and be hung on a tree, and he will become the curse so that our curse is lifted and we receive his righteousness, right? That's the baptism, essentially, that he's talking about. And what I love about this part right here, he says, I am in distress until it is accomplished, right? So it's like, I know there's something really bad that I'm going to have to do, but the anxiety and the worry, if you will, before you get there is almost just as bad as actually getting through, what's going to happen. I see that a lot in my patients whenever I talk to them about doing dry needling. I'm going to stab them with a needle, and they're like, oh, and they get all worked up, and then we do the treatment, and they're like, is that it? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, that wasn't so bad. I'm like, yeah, I know. Normally we work it up more in our minds than what it actually really is, the process you go through. And, I think what he's trying to get at is how important what he's about to do is, and how he's ready for it to be accomplished, right? He's ready to, let's just get this over with. Let's get through this, get to the other side. Because on the other side, now we have opportunity. Yes, sir?
I'm curious, though. So I read it in Harmony 1, and I wonder, is it that the fire is going to come? Or is it, like John says, is it the judgment, and he wishes that the judgment would just come, so he doesn't
Okay.
have to go to the
Right. there's a potential with that. Because, I mean, he does pray in the garden, if there's any other way, let this happen, right? And so, I mean, there's potential with that. I can't say yes or no on any of them, so the baptism is his death on the cross, right? And then he steps into verse 51, talking about, in 51 through 53, talking about bringing division and not peace, and how people are going to be divided and separated. Well, what is it that creates the division and separation? It's whether you believe in Jesus or you don't believe in Jesus, right? And so those who believe in Jesus are in one, those who don't are in another. And so if you're in a family, like it says here, a family of 5, we're going to have some that are going to believe and some that won't. And so there will be division created based on whether you believe in Jesus or don't believe in Jesus. So there's judgment that's made and condemnation in a sense that's meted out on those who do not believe in Jesus. You know what I mean? And so I can see where the other guy's coming from to say, where he's talking about the fire on the earth being the spreading of the gospel because of how the rest of it plays out, where he's talking about, I didn't come to bring peace, but I came to bring division, because people are going to be separated. The sheep and the goats are going to be separated because of Jesus. You either believe in him or you don't. And so that's kind of the big piece there. But like I said, it's very figurative, so we could go in a lot of different directions with fire. Because I would say 99% of the time, whenever I read fire in the Bible, I'm thinking punishment, I'm thinking destruction, I'm thinking end of the world. Those are the things, right? But we have in Acts chapter 2, where that's the description of the Spirit, is tongues as of fire, right? And then later on in Timothy, Paul tells Timothy to fan into flame, right, the gift that you have received, right? And so he's kind of talking about the fire that is within from the Spirit and fanning that into flame. And so it's not always 100% applied from the perspective of, punishment, condemnation. We see it some in the Old Testament where it talks about fire as being a cleansing and, being where it's removing the impurities and purifying through passing through the fire. And, when you take all those together and then you look at what he's talking about, I think that is more in the direction of what he's talking about, is this: there's a cleansing of the world, there's a cleansing of humanity to those who believe in Jesus and those who do not believe in Jesus. That's the way I look at it, because I don't really see it as being where he's talking about the end of the world or all condemnation on man, but that when he gets to this baptism, that's when the fire is going to be poured out, and that's when the cleansing and the delineation of who believes and who doesn't is going to happen. That's the way I look at it. But we could argue it all day long. But if you agree with me, you're right.
I think either way, no matter how you take it, fire always brings distress, whether it's purification,
right?
Fire purification,
right?
Judgment.
Absolutely.
Really
right. No, yeah, I agree 100%. Again, if I think about it again from that fire purification side, that's essentially what Jesus does for the Jews, right? Because when he comes in, there's no more, well, my great-granddaddy was this, and my granddaddy was this, and my daddy is this, and so that makes me this, and you can't touch me because of, my... Jesus says, no, all that's gone now. His people are pure and are in his body, in his church, because they have heard and they have believed, they have loved, and they've obeyed. Not because of where they were born or what race they are or anything else. And so out of the people, the Jewish people, we know that they didn't all come, right? If we've been reading through Romans, that only a remnant essentially comes out of God's people who actually believe in Jesus. And so there is a cleansing, a purifying of the people of Jerusalem, of the Jews, as well as the rest of the world, whether or not you believe or don't believe. That cleansing comes from the gospel. When it's presented, do you believe and move forward, or do you reject it and then, continue on? So I think there's a good argument there for the purification aspect of things. But definitely we see that change is brought, right? And we know that with fire. There's going to be a change that's going to happen.
I interchanged fire to new law. I have come to bring new law to the earth. How that, the way it reads in the verse, just to put it in that context, think about it at that time.
right? A new way of, because the whole point is that with what's about to happen, things are going to change. And it's going to be very radical, and it's going to be very difficult, and it's going to be a stressful and distressing situation that's going to change the face of the earth, really, from that point on. Right, and then he rolls right into that next part here in verse 54. He says, he also said to the crowds, when you see a cloud rising in the west, you say at once, a shower is coming. So it happens. And when you see a south wind blowing, you say there will be a scorching heat. And it happens. You hypocrites, you know how to interpret appearance of the earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? So that, again, he's kind of pointing back to what we're just talking about. You see all of the signs, you see all of the lessons, you see all that Jesus is doing, but you're like, no, that can't be it. But you have enough common sense and ability to look at the world around you and go, oh, it's going to rain tomorrow, or it's going to be hot tomorrow, just by looking at what's around you. But you're willfully blind to what Jesus is doing right in front of you, to see that things are changing, to see that there's going to be a change, to see that that Jesus is the Son of God, right? Again.
All the prophecies, like a lot of people recognize who he was. A lot of people did.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But if you go back to the parable before about the faithful
being ready,
manager, because that's obviously, to me anyway, at that time, very obviously directed at Jews.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, it's like they came to cast fire, and I'm not bringing peace, which was
Yeah.
they expected.
Right.
Because he was going to conquer the Romans, and they were going to
Exactly.
peace in their land.
Right. And that's
It's like, no,
Yeah.
y'all are going to be, there's no peace in this nation.
no.
And to me, the fire also, casting fire on the earth goes back to Sodom and Gomorrah,
Mm-hmm.
where God went, pulled out his people,
And then
and the rest were destroyed.
yeah.
And like that's sort of what happens to, like, when it became spiritual Israel, because then the ones who wanted to make the kingdom of Israel
Yeah.
took Jerusalem,
Right.
and were completely crushed.
Yeah. Yeah. The Romans came in and burned everything. Yeah. Not one stone left upon another. Right. Yeah. That is, and he told them there too. They're talking about being able to interpret the signs and interpret the times and that kind of thing. He does tell, and I think it's in Luke 17 or somewhere in there where he kind of does the same thing he does in Matthew 24 and 25, where he says, you see all these buildings, there will not be one stone left upon another. And he goes through and he talks about the Son of Man will come and all these things. And then I think it's in Luke where it talks about, when you see the abomination of desolation encircling the city. And I think that's the one where he makes it very clear. It's an army that's coming that will destroy Jerusalem. And then we see in AD 70 where that is fulfilled. And any semblance or any possibility of a physical Jewish kingdom and nation is removed because all of their records and their history was destroyed. So there's no way that they can know who is in the Levitical line to offer sacrifices. There's no way that they can know who is in any kind of royal line or what tribe they're from or anything else to be that nation of God. So the nation of Israel that we know over there today is not the nation of Israel that's referenced in the Bible. Now, I'm sure that they would be very upset with me if they heard me say that. But none of them can trace themselves back to know that, yes, this is our roots. And that's a part of the exclamation point that's made in AD 70 to say, we're done here. Right? Now we're moving on to spiritual Israel. We're moving on to those who are followers and believers in Christ. We're moving on to those where this message creates the division, those who believe, those who don't believe. And he makes it, he's like, if you'll just use common sense, right? Like he's talking about here, you can look at the weather and you can tell what's going to happen because you're using common sense. But if you use common sense and pay attention to what's going on around you, then you're going to believe me and you're going to follow me and you're going to be a part of that number that believe and not fall into the other. And I think for the most part, that's exactly the way it is with reading the Bible. When we read the Bible, if we will just simply take a minute and use common sense, it makes a whole lot of just good common sense to understand what it's teaching. And when we're having to go through multiple hoops of mental gymnastics to try to come up with support for our idea, then we really need to step back and say, okay, is this really accurate, or am I just trying to make the Bible say something, right? And that's hard because that comes from our bias, which comes from what we've heard all our lives, which means we have to challenge who we are, what we believe, and just throw all that out the window and let the Bible speak, right? And that's where we want to be and where we strive to be, but as human beings, that's hard sometimes for us to be able to do. Does anybody know the what they call the type of Greek that the New Testament was written in? Yeah, Koine. The reason it's called Koine Greek is because it's the common language. So you have the traditional Greek that most of the literature and things are written in, and it's almost like if you talked about for us today how we do language in grade levels. Like you'd have, if it's written on a 12th grade level, most of us are like, wow, I got to put my thinking cap on to get through and get my dictionary out to understand what they're writing. Whereas if it's written on like a 5th or 6th grade level, most all of us can read it and understand it pretty easily, right? And so that's kind of a ish difference between Koine Greek and then like the standard Greek that we use for writing. It was written in the common everyday language. So it was intended for the common individual to be able to read it and understand it and then move forward with it, right? Same way with like the King James Version. When it was written in the common language of that time and era. When we read that today, sometimes it can be kind of hard because you're like, huh? These and thous and who's and what's in that, and then it can almost begin to sort of create a whole different type of language. And some people are like, well, if you don't address the Lord as thee and in your prayer, then that's wrong. No, that was just how they would say you and me. It was just how they spoke. And so, it was, when we get into the Bible, it should be such that it's a common, easy, if you will, thing to be able to understand. When we talk about all the time the primary symbols for the gospel, right? Christ came down, he died on the cross, he was buried, was raised, ascended, and he's coming back. And we see that over and over again through the New Testament in very complex ways, but it all boils down to the same simple message, right? And then the more you dig into it and the more complex you make it, you step back and you're like, yeah, it's still the same message. It's still the same message, right? And so when we look into the Bible, we really need to be careful because that's kind of a large part of what he's saying here. But then also paying attention within ourselves. Like you're talking about your sister and brother-in-law and the struggle they're having in their congregation. You have to be able to pay attention to the area around you and use your common sense and use the ingenuity and intelligence plus what God gives us in his word to be able to make good, smart, spiritual decisions for yourself, for your family, for your congregation. And hopefully what you'll be able to do is like what they try to do is to be able to get everyone to come together and discuss it and come to a good biblical conclusion. And that sometimes that's hard to do because believe it or not, people can be hard-headed, right? I know I never am. Don't ask Christy about that. Right? No, I think we all recognize that pretty strongly. All right, let's pick up verse 57 through 59. And why do you not judge for yourselves what is right? As you go with your accuser before the magistrate, make an effort to settle with him on the way, lest he drag you to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the officer, and the officer put you in prison. I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the very last penny. So what's the point of this last piece here as we're putting these things together? How does this tie in with discussing about the manager, discussing about God wants to give you the kingdom and don't worry about things, discussing the fire and the baptism and the division, discerning the times? How does that fit in where he's talking about here? Is he just trying to tell us, okay, well, practically, guys, this is how you need to handle it when somebody wants to sue you? Is that his point, or is there something else? Mm-hmm.
Between the two of you before you have to go litigating.
Right. Take care of the problem at the lowest level possible, right? Don't let it escalate because when it escalates, it's completely out of your hand.
Like in the time of Moses, first he was the one judge.
Yeah. Jethro
Yeah,
steps in,
like
helps him out.
levels.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, unless there's a real problem, you should be able to know what's right.
Yeah.
Decide for yourself and work it out.
Right.
Spiritually, they were relying on priests, the scribes,
Right.
and the Pharisees.
Right.
They weren't judging for themselves.
Right.
Often.
Right. They were just, whatever the priest says goes. And what is Jesus telling them here? He's saying, you have the ability to understand weather patterns. You have the ability to understand what's going on here. You have the ability to discern what's happening. You need to use the intelligence and discernment that you have been given from God to make a smart decision. He says, and why do you not judge for yourselves what is right? So with everything that came up, they would just be like, I don't know, priest, what do you got? That's what we do. And he's like, no, you can't do that. Each one is held accountable for what they have done in the body, whether good or evil, right? And all of us are held accountable. Y'all can't get there, like I've said many times before, and say, well, Stephen said. He'd be like, Stephen, who? What? No. What does God say? What did Jesus say? That's what's important, right? And I think the practical piece that you can pull out here is absolutely settle it together. Don't let it escalate. But I think the point he's trying to get across to the crowd and to us here as we put it all into context is, you can see, you can use discernment, you can use your intelligence, your common sense to understand who Jesus is, if you will. Don't give that over to somebody else, but seek to make that your understanding and decision. Yes.
You could also be foreshadowing the new relationship after the law.
I think it'd be a good one.
You had to go, that was,
Yeah.
you had a problem with God, like you had to go to the priest, they had to,
Yeah.
you had that whole, and then suddenly now,
Right.
we have to have a direct path with Jesus is sort of also our accuser by being perfect, but we can
Yeah.
have that accord with him.
Right.
And before the we can have the peace with him before we get to the judgment seat.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a big piece of what point of what he's getting at here is, make peace now. Don't let the judge have to mete out justice, right? So you can understand, use your intellect, don't defer to anyone else, recognize what's going on, walk in faith with Jesus. And then what have you done? Well, you settled accounts, because what does Jesus do? He justifies. He reconciles. He brings us into right relationship. He does those things that he's talking about here, settling before you have to get to the judge at the judgment seat. So do that now. Make that settlement. Make that submission to Christ now, so that all those things are fulfilled. And you're not putting it off. You're not waiting. You're not saying, well, I don't know. No, put the time in. Use your brain, right? Engage, figure it out, and then walk with Christ. Right? Walk with Him. I think those are some interesting things, because you can kind of miss some of that as you come through, because we can get kind of wrapped up in just the practical layout of it. But I think when you put all of those pieces together, it really points to that direction. And then when you get into 13, he rolls right into, repent or perish. And again, it's pointing right back to discern the times, see Jesus, believe in Him, walk in Him, make that settle with Him, that relationship with Him, so that you're not getting caught up with judgment, so that you're not getting caught up with the perishing of the rest of the world. Repent, turn away, turn to Him, and you can avoid all that. I think that's, he's just kind of walking down that line of thought to try to keep rebolstering it to us all. Okay. Any other points or comments before we close out this evening? Okay. Class is yours. Thank you very much.